Alright, we're moving on to authentication. That's most people's favorite part. I still don't know why, but it is, according to what I know. Now, authentication, as interesting as it may sound, is one of the most important part of your project. It is the part where when something goes wrong, if your application is something that is an enterprise, or basically something that is used by a wide range of people, you might obviously get someone or some type of people trying to break through or access certain things they're not supposed to be allowed to access. Hence, your authentication should be one of the strongest things in your application. Now that we know this, I am basically going to give the basic idea of how authentication works and the basic implementation of it. But at the same time, by the end of this video, we should be able to also implement authentication in a more scalable way possible, in the best way possible. So now that we know this too, I am basically going to start. Okay, so now we have our model. We have the user model, car model, order model, product model. We have everything working. We have our routes file, and we have the user routes. But in order for us to handle authentication, since it seems to be one of the most important parts of our application, we're going to have to create separate parts or a separate flow for authentication. Now, what do I mean by separate flow? Okay, authentication is basically going to have its own modules, right? But before we do anything on authentication, I just want to throw in or teach a simple way of handling it, just to favor the beginners. Then after that, we apply the knowledge of using it in a scalable way, right? So now we are going to come into routes, and then we are going to create auth.route.js, right? auth.route.js, right? We have auth.route.js. Now what we are going to do is, as usual, we call our router by saying require express. Then we initialize the router out of express. Okay, now that we have this, we have to export it just so we don't forget. Okay, we have it now. We're going to create our first route, right? So we're going to say router.post. I mean, if you're creating a user, you're definitely trying to send a request into the database, so we are posting, right? So we post, and then the routes or the endpoint for this post, I'll call it sign up. Yeah, I like register. Call it register. And then I would pass in my asynchronous function here. Okay, so whenever I visit this endpoint, this is the function that I want to perform. What do I want to perform, or what do I want to do? Whatever I want to do whenever I visit this endpoint, which is register, I'm going to do it here. Okay, remember, this is just a basic or simple implementation of creating a user. So I'm going to use a try catch block here, and then I am going to log my error first. I'm going to log my error. Okay, and then we now move into creating the user. We already have a user model here. We are going to need it for creating our user. So we're going to have to import it. So I'm going to say const user model, or const user should be equal to require, then we require the model, right? So we have, then we have user.model. Okay, I personally like to add the extensions. You can, yeah. So we have user here. Now, in order for us to create the user in order for us to create the user in the database, we could do a couple of things, right? So what we can do is we can create a variable and say something like new user is equal to, then we have a new keyword initializing a new user object, and then inside this user object you're going to take the fields in here. So username, email, password. For this we are not going to set it because by default you already said it's false. Okay, I'm going to go back into my auth route, and then I'm going to say that username field that we saw there is going to, that we are going to fill that username field with request.body.username. So whatever we pass into the body part, this part, whatever we pass into the body part. So as you can see this is an example of a body. This is also okay, this is an old app I was working on. So this is also another example of the body, right? So whatever we pass into the body should be filled by the request.body.username, right? And then we should take the email section and then pass the request.body.email, right? And we can take the password section, and then pass in request.body.password, right? And then once we have created the new user object, we need to be able to now save this new user object in the database. So what we're going to do is we're going to say await. We could just write new user, dot save, but it's not that it won't work, but it's just not efficient, right? Because at the end of the day you're going to be communicating with two different applications, right? Two different origins, and one, you see, when we run this will just save like immediately, right? But what if the MongoDB website is not responding at the same speed as this? You realize that one tends to perform before the other, and it's a whole different case altogether. Some weird conflict goes on. So because we want to prevent anything like that, or any type of errors that we don't want to be stressing so many days on, we want to bring a await, and then that says that whenever you run this function, you want to make sure that everything is in line or everything is ready before you perform this action, right? When we enter the register endpoint and we create a new user object, we want to make sure that both applications are ready to perform their actions before the user is saved. Hope you understood it. Okay, so I'm basically going to test this, but before we do that, let's send a response to indicate that our endpoint actually works, right? So I'm going to say response dot status 200. Status 200 is basically saying that the function or the action that we tried to perform was successful. So status 200 JSON, and then we are going to say that it's going to have a message object that says what user created successfully, of which you can use on the front end, and we can say data. So the data is going to involve the new user. Okay, we're going to involve the new user, obviously. So now that we have this, let us handle the response for this, the response for the error 2. So when it fails, we want to say that it has a status. We're sending a response that has a status of 500, and then JSON. Then we are going to say that it's going to send out a message we can use on the front end that says, a message you can use on the front end that says user creation failed. User creation failed, and then we can pass in an error saying error. Okay, right, now that we have this working, we want to make sure that we are using this endpoint in our main routes file, right? So I can just copy this and paste it here. I can copy and paste it here. I can turn this into auth, and then I can come here, copy and paste. Then I can just change this to auth routes, and then here I can make this auth, and then yes. So what is happening here is whenever we go to localhost 4000 API v1, we will go to auth also, and then we'll come to and then over here we'll put in register, since that is what we used in auth routes, right? So register, right? So what I'm going to do is, now we are going to have to test our endpoint to see if it works. But how do we test our endpoints? If you're a beginner, you're going to have to install a software called Postman or Insomnia, but I am using Postman, so I recommend you install Postman. That is going to make it a lot more easy for you to follow the tutorial in general. So this is Postman, and this is an old project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new collection, blank collection, and then I'm going to say that this collection should be called e-commerce tutorial. Okay, now before we start making, let's add a request, right? Let's add a request. So now we have the request here. Let's name it. Let's not create a request first. Let's delete this, and then let's add a folder. So add a folder, then name that folder auth. Let's name that folder auth, and then inside the folder we can add a request that should be can add a request that should be a post request. Like we said over here, and then we now have to come and write localhost 4000 No, we don't want to write localhost 4000 because at the end of the day we'll be having multiple requests like we have here, and then it's going to make you keep writing the same localhost 4000. So in order for us to fix such an issue, we are going to this, and then we'll come to variables, and then we create a new variable, say base URL, and then the initial value of the base URL can be HTTP. HTTP localhost 4000 API v1. Okay, then we can copy this over. Okay, so yes, we are basically done with our variable. Now how do we use it here? Inside here, let's save, so it turns into a post. Yeah, push request. Then over here, let's name this register user, or just register. It's cool. Okay, then we can bring this curly brackets, 2 curly braces, and then we have base URL. So if you hover over it, it should give you, okay, it's saying that we've not added it, which is weird. So what I'll do now is just add a new variable, and then I'll say that the value here is http local hosts. Okay, I think I know why. I think I should have saved. I think now this should give, okay, still no. So okay, yes, it now works. So what I did was I came and I saved, because that is very important, saving. So it's now there. So what we do is now we can see that we have localhost 4000 API v1, and there's no backlash here, so we just bring our own backlash, and then we have auth. So bring your backlash, then your auth, then your register endpoint here. Now we are going to go into the body, since we specified it over here, right? We are basically in the body, and we are going to change this from none to raw, and then it's already set to JSON, so no need. Then we are going to put in the username over here, and then we are going to put in, so let me say James. I'm not James, but I like the name James, so yeah. So password is going to be I am James. Then I'm gonna say, okay, so I think email comes before the password, so let's change it here. So I'm gonna say email. I'm gonna set the email to James at gmail.com. Okay, now that we have James's account, now that we have the body, the values of the body inside their various objects, we can just press send, but we would get an error. Why would we get an error? Because we have not indicated in our root file or in application that we are receiving JSON files, or we are receiving files from the body in general, right? So what we have to do is we would go into, let's test it first, so that you see the type of error you'd get, right? If I register, right, I would get this user creation failed, and then the error is going to display here, since I had console logged it, right? So it's saying cannot read properly username of undefined. That means that this username, or let me use this, that means this username, or this username specifically, they don't know where they are getting it from. Basically, we don't know where we are getting it from, but we are saying that we are getting it from the body. But how do we make the application know that it's coming from the body? We come to the server.js, and this is very crucial. Do not write it under this. You do not write it, and you write it on top of this, because code reads from the top to bottom. So you want to tell the code that I have something called a body, and then I'm passing things through the body, and then after they pass through the body, come and pass through the routes and look for the right endpoints to execute the functions. Did you get me? So we would say app.use, then we say express.json. Some people tend to use other ones like body parser and the other ones, right? So we would want to take note of that. We have another one called body parser. Just in case you want to know what body parser looks like, this is basically its name. So you're going to use npm body parser and then install, right? But I don't need it. Now that we've been able to add we've been able to make our recognitions over here, we want to go back to Postman and then send. Now when we send, we would get the user information that we are looking for, right? Now this is it. Let us go into our database and see if we've been able to create a user successfully. So we're in the database now. I clicked on this section, database, and then I'm going to browse my collections. Okay, so it should be loaded in a second. Alright, so as you can see, we have our e-commerce MERN, and then inside the users, yeah, so we have James has been created successfully, and you can see James, right? But there's a little problem here. We can see that the password here is I am James, but just in case someone got access to my database and wanted to find the passwords of certain users to go and sell on the dark web or something, the person will be able to get it easily. So what we want to do right now is we want to hash these passwords. Now, what are some of the packages that can help us hash the passwords here? One package that can help do that is bcrypt. Another is also crypto.js. So bcrypt.js and crypto.js, but I prefer bcrypt. I feel like it's a lot simpler to implement, although they seem to have the very, very similar methods of implementing them. I still prefer bcrypt. Okay, so so I'm going to you're going to first of all have to install bcrypt, obviously. So npm bcrypt, and then you can install bcrypt. I already have bcrypt installed, so while this is installing, we can basically go ahead and start importing bcrypt, right? So I have const bcrypt. So I'm going to say bcrypt is equal to require bcrypt. Okay, then we are going to in here we are going to create a variable called hash password, and then we are going to say inside that hash password we're going to say bcrypt. We're going to say bcrypt dot hash sync. Yeah, some people use hash, but still it's the same thing. Hash sync, then request dot body dot password. Then we spread the salt with the value 10. Alright, then so what this is saying is take bcrypt and perform the hash sync algorithm on the value that I'm going to be passing into the password, which is coming from the body of the request. And then after you hash it, sort it with or add the salt value of 10. Okay, then when we get here, we are going to replace this with the hashed password. Okay, so I'm basically going to go in. I'm going to go back into the browser, and I would manually delete all these users that we have created here. Manually delete these users, and I'll go back to Postman, and I would pass in the same register endpoint and then and values, and then we'll see that this password wouldn't be I am James anymore. It would change to something more complex. So we are sending a request, and then we should see this much more complex password, right? But there's another problem. We don't want to review the password in any ways, in any means possible, because at the end of the day, the person or the front-end developer is going to call this, or is going to make a push request on the front end, and this value is going to come out. So we don't want to give any chance to anyone to access this password, right? So how do we fix this? We want to, instead of logging this out, right, we can come here and say let's deconstruct the object, this object, right? We're deconstructing this data object by saying, so const, then we have this destruction and destruction, and then we're going to take the password out. We're going to take the password out, and then after taking the password, we want to say info. Okay, so after taking the password, I want to say info, and then we want to equate it to this new user that we had here. So we'll say new user, right? Now that we have this, we want to now log out info. Okay, we want to log out info and leave the password, right? So how do I verify that this works? One way I can verify that this works is to go back to my Postman. I would go back to my Postman, and I'll change this to James Boy, and I'll change this to James Boy, or just James Boy together, right? So James Boys and James Boy. Then I'm going to create a new user, and then you should realize that we don't see the password getting out also. So I'm going to send, but you see, there's a problem here. As you can see, we are getting a whole new type of data out here, but what we want is just this is the only thing that we want, right? And then we can see that it's stored in this doc. So what we do here is we would equate it to this dots, then doc, and then when we create a new user, say James Boy Girl, and we create a new user, we should just see James Boy Girl. And as you can see, there is no password coming out of here, which makes our application secure to use. Okay, so now that we have the register endpoint created, we want to create our login. So we can say app router. We can say router dot post. Okay, now this post is obviously going to be login. The route is going to be login. So what we will do is, this is also going to be an asynchronous function, taking the request and the response. Taking the request and the response, and then what we can do is to say that what we can do now is to think about the whole concept of how login works in general. If you think about logging, it's basically taking in, most of the time, two of your parameters most of the time, and then when it takes in those details from you, it is going to compare it with the details that already exist in the database, and then brings you a response based on the information you provided, right? So the question is, how do we get these details from the database? Now what we want to do right now is we want to get certain things from the request.body. So you see, at this point we just sent request.body.username, request.body.email, but at this point there's another way we can also get these same values from the request.body, and that is deconstructing them. So we can take the username, and we can also take the email also from the request.body, right? We can also take the password as well, password. But I mean, since this is just login, we can just clear the username and then use this, right? Now that we have this, we want to now make a comparison. So what we're going to do is we're going to look inside the user collection, and then we're going to see if we'll find the same email that we are passing through the request.body. If we look for the email that is being passed through the request.body and then we find it, then we allow the user to log in. But if we don't find it, we send back an error message saying that we can't find the user. So what we're going to do now is to create a variable, say logged or user. I'll just say user, right? And I would say user dot find one. And then what are we finding? We are trying to find the email being passed inside the request.body. And then we can say that we could say that if this user doesn't exist, or if the user is false, we can basically return a response.json. Return a response.status, say 404, and then we have JSON sending back a message object that says user does not exist, or email, let's say email. Now we would want to find the password, or we would want to compare passwords before we allow the user to log in, right? So what we want to do right now is we're going to say const compared password is going to be what? bcrypt dot compare. Then we can pass in the password inside the request.body, and then we compare it with the user that we got here, the user that we got up there, dot password, and then we make a check, right? We check for stuff. We say if this compared password returns a value of false, then we would want to return a response.json, a response.status 404.json saying stating a message object that has email or password is incorrect. Yes, there's a reason why we make it look like this, so that you don't give the person the absolute clue stating that the password is the exact thing that is wrong, so that in case it's the right person who holds their account, the person can just request for a forgot password and then just get everything fixed in the right time. So after this comparison has been done, we are going to be doing some JWT signings and stuff, and then that is what I'm going to basically cover. Alright, so before we do anything or before we close out, we need to test our login endpoint to make sure that everything is working as expected. So what we want to do is I want to go back to my Postman, and then inside the register I'll just create a test user. So I'll just say test, and then I'll say test user, and then I'll say test, right? And then I'll just send. The user has been created. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to log in with the new user that I have created. So here on this auth folder, I'm going to create a new request, which is obviously going to be the login request. I'm going to make it a post request, and then I'll bring in the base URL, and I'll just change this to login. Let's save that, and then inside the body we are going to set this to raw, and then over here we would make this email. Obviously we're going to turn this into email, and then inside the email we would use testuser@gmail.com, and then over here we would use the password being test, but we're going to test the email functionality or the email response first. So I'm going to change this and make it 2. Right, so I'm going to send, and then we should have the requisite response. Okay, so the reason why we are not getting anything is because we forgot to put this in a try catch block. So what we want to do is we're going to create our try catch block here, so that we can log out any errors that we are facing. Okay, then so I'll log out any errors that we face. And then over here I would take this, and then I would put it inside the try block of this try catch block. Then I would also send a response dot status, having status code of 500, and a JSON message, JSON object, so object with a message key and the value saying use, so login failed. Login failed, and then we would have an error object giving us error general. Okay, now that we have been able to handle this, we shouldn't forget we need await here, and we also need await here. Okay, then we can go back and now test our project efficiently. That is sent, and then we should be having a requisite response. If we are still getting an error, okay, so we got the response here, email does not exist. But when we do, so let's test for the password. Let's change the password. Okay, we still get email does not exist. Okay, test user. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in with the right details, and then we should be able to log in. Okay, the reason why we're getting email does not exist because this one was spelled wrongly. So let us test, and then we should, yes, we forgot to, so in case it is successful, we want to send a response with a status code 200, sending a JSON object that sends, so the data should be user, the user, and then the message that we can get from there should be login successful. Okay, now we can go back and then get the requisite response. So login, and then we now have our user information. Now when we twist this, it should have email or password is incorrect according to what we set in here. And then when we do the same for this, we should have email does not exist, just like what we specified here. Okay, so basically this is a simple way of handling authentication in your Node.js Express application or your Node.js Express backend. And then in the next tutorial after this, we are going to be implementing JWT to increase the security and efficiency of our authentication functionalities. Thank you very much for watching this part of the video. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.